As you see in the thumbnail, what if Issei become a god part 1. Before I start, please do support for more awesome content and subscribe my channel and like this video and also share this video with your friends. I have created my other videos playlist, there you can watch my all videos easily, check out as well. Let's start this video. Issei exclaimed, throwing his weight onto his bed, his door left swung open haphazardly. Thank you, God, for giving me a peaceful break from school. He was joking with himself somewhere deep down and he chuckled to himself. Today he was bored and surprisingly, he didn't want to watch porn or play games. Today he just wanted to relax and sleep. A nice relaxing day after a long day of school, longer than normal, thanks to all his stupid friends. His stomach growled. He didn't eat much at school today, but that was because he didn't like the food that was served today and he didn't want to talk about the food. It was a big double bad for him also, as his parents left the house for a date, which meant they wouldn't be back till at least midnight, so he would be left for himself to get food. He didn't want to cook for himself though, and everything he knew was some simple ramshackle meal worth of the bugs that didn't seem to be interested either. He threw himself up, his expression beaming his happiness for the turnout of today. He walked through his door, paying no mind to it as it was left swung open. He rushed down the steps that lead to his room and burst through to his living room. He slipped through the furnishing and made his way to the door that led outside, jumping into his shoes with the speed of a cheetah. He walked out the door at a more refined speed. It was almost night, but he had plenty of spare time to grab a quick bite of grub. Almost immediately after leaving his house, he felt odd and out of place, as if someone was watching his back. He continued his walk though, his head was held high like a natural as he walked past houses, people, and restaurants that were less interesting to him. He couldn't help, but still felt like he was being followed, but he decided to ignore it once more and walked into the fast food restaurant of his choice. Once obtaining his bagged food and drink and ate it too, he wasn't sure how to spend the rest of his day. He wasn't about to start walking to an empty house, so he started to move towards the city park. Of course, it required him to cross the bridge he normally took heading home from school, but he thought a walk in the park would be good for him before nightfall, and he imagined most people would be going home by now, so he would be alone with his thoughts. He was right in his assumption about people heading home from the park, but when he crossed the bridge, he was immediately distracted by a girl who had called to him. "Are you Issei Hyodo?" Facing her, she had long silky black hair and bright violet eyes. She wore a school uniform, which was a dark red jacket with a letter P embroidered in gold, a white undershirt with a red bow, and a green skirt with a thin white stripe around the edge at the ends of it. "I think so," he replied, trying to be comical, which failed miserably. "Sorry, how can I help you? You're the first girl to approach me like this, so sorry." The girl looked genuinely taken aback. She adjusted her expression back to normal, she remembered the orders given to her well, and she was smart enough to not go against them. "You're to observe Issei Hyodo to see if he has sacred gear. I want no harm done to him and I want you to protect him. However, I want you to immediately report back to me your findings." She wouldn't dare mess up the orders of her beloved Azazel. "Well, I've just heard a lot about you and would like to be your friend if you allow me." Now it was Issei's turn to be amazed. "You want to be friends with me? Why would a girl like you want to be friends with a loser like me?" She didn't know how to reply, he made a solid point. She had to be careful with what she said next to not stir any questions in him. Hell, what was she going to do? She had to maintain her innocent human facade and not reveal her fallen angel side until the time was needed. She would play the innocent schoolgirl. "So, do you have a girlfriend?" Her voice was timid and she did her best to fake a blush. Acting was something to help her pass time, and she considered herself pretty good at it. Besides, it worked in making her closer to the boy, making her job to watch him easier. She would tell him later that it was all just a ruse and she didn't actually have feelings for him, cruel as it may be. "No. Not really, everyone thinks I'm a pervert at school, which I can't lie to you there, sometimes I do want to go back, but then again, so most girls just despise me. The only time girls talk to me is to beat me, kind of sad." His speech was choppy and transitioned and she could only imagine how he was feeling and what he was thinking. She knew all of this already about him, but based on what she had observed, this was the exact opposite of how he should have reacted. To say she was surprised was more than the understatement of the year. She was straight flabbergasted. "Well, I don't think you're anything like that." She was quick to jump in and try and fix the situation she found herself in. "It's okay to be perverted, it's in your nature, besides I wish people would give me the looks you give ya." She had no idea where she was going, why, or what hole she was digging with herself, but it was all part of her mission, right? "Hey, can I get your name? I mean, you already know me and a lot about me, but I don't even know as little as your name about you," he said coolly, an exact opposite of what she was expecting again. She was under the idea that he would be beaming to know a girl was stalking him, but now she was beginning to be intrigued. She decided she would play it cool, see if his response changed. "I'm sorry." She bowed to him deeply. "My name is Yuma. Yuma Amano. I'm sorry, I was just so excited to meet you and ask you out that I forgot." His expression turned to shock and excitement. "I'm sorry, come again." She smiled brightly and gave another deep bow. "Issei Hyodo, would you please go out with me?" She yelled that part out a little too loud, but she definitely stunned him. "Of course. But why me?" he questioned and looked down at his feet. She walked closer to him and got within his personal space. "Well, my boyfriend, haven't I already told you the answer to that?" Perhaps it was the closeness, but he swore he saw her eyes glow purple, and of course he remembered what she had said about him. She had told him that she loved how he stayed persistent in his dreams even after so many struggles and hardships. But when exactly did he hear that? When had she said that? Why was his head starting to hurt from her closeness, and he swore her eyes were glowing? With nothing else being said between the two of them, the two exchanged numbers and went separate ways, bidding each other goodbye. Issei began to walk back home without a sound as his head pondered more questions than he could answer or keep up with. He was confused about how tonight went, but he could still very evidently feel one thing. He still felt like he was being watched. It only faded that whole night when he was with Yuma. Those short few moments when he was with her, it didn't feel like the hairs on the back of his neck were sticking straight up, as if they had some form of sixth sense. She turned back when she was sure Issei couldn't see her anymore and began to follow him. She could tell something was definitely inside the boy, but she wasn't sure exactly what, and that left it up to her to determine if she should go back and report to Azazel and trust that he was correct, or if she should follow her own gut instinct. Her attention averted to her left, a pair of brown eyes that locked with her from afar that only came out when Issei passed. She recognized the girl immediately as a member of the peerage belonging to Ria's Gremory, the sister of the great Mao. If she had conflicts with her, or the girl that was looking at her with eyes in stalk, there would be hell to pay. Literally. She turned away, accepting that she had been compromised, and summoned a circle below her, a purple crest that belonged to the Grigori. She would immediately report back to Azazel as instructed, but as she disappeared, along with the girl with white hair, she noticed a terrible power that seeped from Issei's house. It wasn't strong, but it was ill. Before she could act, she was teleported, and she began to fear she was already too late to protect the boy. The energy she felt wasn't there before he left, and was definitely there to harm him. "Oh no," she said aloud in the room she found herself in. Issei opened the door to his house, and the terror that struck him was something he couldn't comprehend as he fell to his knees. Before him, his parents laid strewn out, only pieces of the figure they used to form, their blood splattered on the walls of his living room, sprayed out on the floor, soaking the cloth furniture. The display of broken objects and decorations were an evident sign of struggle. And the gashes in the wall looked like they came from a monster. His mother and father were clean-cut, tangled up in an unnatural position by metal wires that he could only assume were razor-sharp piano wires. Their chests were sliced open, their rib cages were cracked open. Issei gagged and threw up all he had that night. The door closed behind him, and he moved, and with reflexes that surprised even him, he threw his left arm up to block a blade from hitting his vitals, but it bit deep into his arm. He gave a cry as recognition came and sent him pain that came in unimaginable waves. There was a man dressed in a black torn cloak, his facial features were only a silhouette, piercing eyes, and white teeth on a black canvas that made the scene all the more terrifying. However, he got distracted by the terror of the man's appearance that he took another slash into his arm again, this one slicing down to the bone as the monster made a sawing motion, and now he noticed the blade was a writhing mass of black with red veins that screamed "I'm alive." He crawled as fast as he could, stumbling onto his feet. He rushed off heading for the stairs that lead to his room, but slipped and slid on the blood-smeared wood panel floor, forcing him face first into the stairs, breaking his nose and causing him even more pain. He raised himself up, using the stairs as his support as a laugh came from the man behind him. The blade that made the man's hand slashed the wall beside him, slicing through it and cleaved into his other arm. He screamed in pain as he limped up the stairs with a newfound speed. He slid into the hallway and rushed into his room, only to be met by the appendage of the killer once more, this time slicing into his stomach. He turned at this and faced the man, but before Issei had the chance to do anything, there was a sharp left hand jab straight into his torn abdomen that sent shockwaves of electrocuting pain through him. His vision began to fade, and images of his mother and father filled his head. He backpedaled in pain, and the monster slashed his thigh, making him collapse to the floor directly below his window. The killer grabbed a fistful of his hair, tugging him up and yanking against his window. The glass shattered on impact and he fell through, falling a full story and landing in his yard with a storm of shattered glass falling above him, landing in him, and sticking in the ground beside him. He heard footsteps somewhere above him. With as much effort as he could muster, he moved, worming his way into a sea of broken glass. The shards gnawed at him as he did, ripping his flesh, but the pain was minimal to what his heart and body were feeling. The man had to be stopped. He would not get away with what he had done to his parents. Coughing up blood, his chin grazed the grass, adding to the bleeding. A low-pitched heartbeat started to ring in his ears. He rolled over, laying on his back, his body felt so heavy he could no longer move with his own strength. The ground hooked with the man's footsteps, and he came into his vision. His arm began to twist and transform, and the smile he had grew wider. Requiscat in pace. The man was gone in a flash of red. He had never heard the language, but it was like clarity had erupted through him. Rest in peace. He would not. He knew he wasn't going to make it, but he no longer cared. He would make him pay, in this life or the next. His head fell to his side, and he was met by a reflection of himself from shattered glass that stuck upright in the ground. Tears flowed from his eyes, blood splattered across his face mixed with his family's. There was nothing behind his eyes, which looked so emotionless to him it was amazing. All the happiness that happened to him in the past hours were poorly reflected behind his lifeless eyes. There was nothing left but the rage, hatred, and the bile that the killer had forced into him. The dark fog slowly veiled his eyes, but it could not subdue his rage. He would not rest, not until he had revenge. Not yet. The darkness in his mind whispered, promising blood, domination, and revenge. He forced himself to look at himself once more. The low mist hung in the air, packing with it a feeling of calmness that washed over him. The glass beside him reflected green eyes, slit and filled with the rage of death itself. An oath was made, and Issei closed his eyes in acceptance. His vision sputtered as small flashes of light went off here, and they're like cameras going off. He looked around for a few seconds. There were officers everywhere, criminal yellow tape completely surrounding his house, and lots of men in black suits. He recognized them immediately as agents for the Public Intelligence Agency. He closed his eyes again, too weak to keep them open. The kid's name is Issei Hyodo. We informed his school and other local officials of his death. We identified his blood being the only one going up the steps, allowing us to form what happened. From what we can tell, he was attacked as he entered his house. We assume he got all his slash marks as he was making his way to the stairs and defending himself with his arms. Ultimately, there are fist marks on his skull, which indicates he was thrown out of the window from upstairs, and the blood in the grass show he was able to cry a little distance before turning on his back and bleeding to death. The voice of a man came. The kid was able to go that long. With those deep cuts, trauma, and from that full no less. What the hell is he? No normal human could handle that. A second male voice replied. The body can endure the harshest pains when adrenaline is at its highest. After seeing his parents like that and knowing who it did, the rage and animosity he must have felt. I suppose you're right, seeing your parents suspended by piano wire would traumatize someone mentally and make them physically resistant. Yes. There was a sigh. I want your opinion on something, since you are new. Do you believe in spirits? Like ghosts? The stuff in myths and urban legends. Precisely. In those stories you call myths, why do they come back? Because they can't rest in peace. As soon as the words entered his head, there was a field of anger that flashed in him. His eyes shot open, and the glass beside his head showed they were green as emeralds and slit like predators. He mumbled the words, staring dead in the eyes of the terrified men. Requiscat in pace. He's alive. Help, someone help him. He is alive. From that point forward, everything was a series of flashes that wouldn't end. He was lifted onto a medical bed and strapped in before being forced into an ambulance. His eyes lids were forced open as a light was shown in. His eyes look normal, dilated properly, but the glass, it'll be a miracle if he ever sees again. Well, let's hope he pulls off another miracle. He already pulled one off. He was officially labeled dead, the school announced him dead, and news channels reported on him. There came a steady beeping, a mechanical digital heartbeat, calm and slowing constantly with each beat before reaching a steady rhythm. There was blackness all around him, and the rage was still deep inside him, festering. His eyes shot open, and he was in a room, more specifically, a hospital room. An IV attached into his right arm was the indicator of that, and a TV hanging in a corner was turned on just loud enough for him to hear. The murder of the Hyodo family was a great tragedy to befall onto the people of Kuo, and the school mourns their student's loss and mourn his supposed death as well. The motives behind the killer's attack against the Hyodo family is unclear, and the killer doesn't appear to have any other targets. All further information has been redacted and disclosed until further notice to protect the whereabouts of Issei Hyodo's current place of rest. Issei started, his anger beginning to reach to the surface until the door opened, but his attention was set on the TV. The most recent strike involving Issei Hyodo is a message that was carved in a farmer's crop field. The news reporter showed a field with words burned into it. Requires cat in pace. He clenched his teeth to the point they hurt. He swore vengeance. He felt power rush to his head as his vision filled with green. Ah! You're finally awake. His attention shifted, the green faded, and he was now looking at a pale white girl who entered only moments before the new channel displayed its message, her long blue hair an asset that impressed him for its length and health. He tried to speak, but he was interrupted by the fast-talking girl, adding to his annoyance. An annoyance he never knew he would get from a girl talking to him. No, don't speak. You're still very weak, you were in a fatal condition for a month, and now, you are somehow recovering faster than imaginable. You are an anomaly. Issei nodded, though he didn't understand. The girl was a fast talker. Very fast. His stomach growled. Ah. I'll be right back with some food, you'll be okay by yourself for a bit. The girl was sweet. It almost reminded him of Yuma, he wondered how she was handling this news. He nodded to the girl. Once the girl had left and closed the door behind her. The news had moved on to things that were boring. He closed his eyes and placed his hands in his lap. He let the darkness that he saw when he was dying take over his mind once more. You are the boy I am stuck inside. You're the one that gave me a second chance at life. Issei said and looked around the darkness, unwavering in his appearance. I gave you power unmatched. You have seen things my other wielders have not, suffered more than past wielders. You want revenge, domination, and power. That's exactly what you get. Show me yourself. Issei said, his voice using more force than intended. You are either very brave or very stupid. Issei couldn't determine where exactly the voice came from. I'll show myself, but the few who know my identity wouldn't dare want to see me in my full state of being. The void he was in shifted, the inky black background stayed, but new shapes formed, multicolored clouds sparkling with odd entities as unnatural colors shifted across the dark cyclorama, and now, towering in his vision like a sentinel, was a dragon. Red scales, as dark as blood, holding a piercing green gaze so predatory he couldn't help but stare back, and staring into its green eyes, he saw the terrible acts of war and destruction, the death and decay that came with the destructive power the dragon had earned and now gifted to him. I am Dreg, the heavenly dragon of domination, and you are my wielder. The Red Dragon Emperor. The dragon smiled down at him and he couldn't help but smile back. The door swung open and the first thing to fill his nostrils was smoke. Smoke was what filled his lungs now with each deep breath. His vision was becoming more and more obscured with each passing second as the room began to fill with the poison air. The girl who left to bring him food stood in the doorway, her long hair a mess and her pale features red from heat. Behind her, there was an orange hue and a gray background of smoke. To say he was shocked was an understatement, but he refused to show it on his face. If there were a fire in a hospital at all, one sprinkler on the ceiling would trigger them all on that floor. Not even to mention every single alarm system in the whole building would scream in multi-toned screeches that wailed to new heights at each second without fail. Even with that being factual, hospitals were slammed packed to the nines with state-of-the-art anti-fire systems that would put firefighters alone to shame, and someone disabled them. He grew angry at the thought of who he thought it was. He breathed in and was met instantly by a horrible smell. He gagged and reeled back in his bed, forcing his hands up to his nose. It was the smell of flesh and fire. It took a few seconds for him to steel himself, and in that time the girl moved to him, tears in her eyes and streaming down her face. She removed the IV that was attached to his arm and helped him stand, but she was far weaker. She tried to lift and support him, but it was more than she proved able to do, and he mostly lifted himself up on his own. The girl fell to the ground and coughed until the sound was a horrible cackle that made her sound close to death. His instinct was what clouded his mind. He looked around the room, looking for something to help the girl. He grabbed the blankets from his bed and threw it around the girl, tying the fabric like a rope around her waist. She didn't seem to care, nor did she seem to notice. Her coughing only became worse, and he began to feel less and less affected by the smoke that clouded the room in a thick sheet. Partner. You are a dragon. You have an extremely high affinity to heat, smoke, poison, and everything else have the senses of a dragon, as well as all the instincts and hormones, and yes, you have weaknesses, but we will go over them later. She cannot survive this like you, so hurry if your goal is to save her. Use that brain of yours and become a decisive tactician. Stay here, I'll be right back. He said, sounding far more emotionless than he intended. The girl nodded and he felt stupid. Where exactly would she go? Into the fires. He turned and made his way to the open door. There was an explosion behind the door, sending an exploded oxygen tank through the window to the left of the door, trailing a stream of flames behind it. He walked through it, feeling drawn like a moth. He walked through the fire, his gown caught fire on his body, but he felt nothing as the flames enveloped him. He moved to his left and peered through the window with a hole in it, taking careful note of how far he was off the ground, and then he averted his attention to the flames that crawled up his leg. Normal fire can't harm you. You should be fine, but be careful with the girl. There was a scream down the hallway to his right. He turned, and what he saw was something he wasn't sure he would ever forget. Another nurse, this one running frantically, trying to extinguish a fire that was eating away at her flesh. He didn't know what to do, but his actions came like instinct to him. A bone-chilling breeze swirled around him in less than a second. He pulled his hands outstretched to his sides and took a single step forward as a prep to drive his hand into a fierce clap. The sound reverberated through the halls, and the ice-like wind whistled towards the girl, extinguishing every flame in the hall and sending the girl to her knees. She looked at him, tears in her eyes, and stood, her burnt fabrics barely covering her exposed body. She rushed over to him and slammed into him, hugging him close to her, as if he was sacred to her. He tried hard to ignore the fact that he could feel all of her exposed body touch completely against his nude one. This is not the time. Besides, I have a girlfriend. Remember Yuma. He tried to tell himself, but there was another explosion down the hall. He turned, fearing for the girl in his room who cared for him, but the flames got nowhere close to the door. Partner, I know now isn't the time, but Yuma Mono doesn't exist. She was a fallen angel. I can assure you she had some other intention for dating you, whatever it may be. When Drake said that, his world flipped. He knew the dragon wasn't lying, and that just made the revelation much worse. The chill came back, spiraling around him, and the ground at his feet frosted over. The girl let go immediately, and he looked her in the eyes. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to scare you, he started. He looked down at his hands and clenched them shut tightly, stifling his thoughts so he could focus on saving the only two girls he had seen since that night that were real. But we need blankets. I can get you and another nurse out of here through a window that blew open, but I need blankets. The girl seemed to get over her initial shock and nodded. She turned and motioned him to follow her. She guided him back the way he saw her come, and there was a door that she reached for. He looked at it and immediately determined that it was smoldering hot. She didn't touch it, she caught herself before she did more harm to her body. She turned to him. There are clean ones behind that door in the hamper, but the door that was the first time he had heard her speak. Her voice was delicate and soft, it was sweet, and she sounded young. He reached for the handle and grabbed it. There was a sizzle almost like metal cooling rapidly in water. The girl flinched as he touched the metal, but then looked intently at him as he opened the door without a single ounce of pain, shock filling her face. He walked in the room and grabbed as many towels as he could, hoping they would be enough to lower the girls out of the window that was blown open. He threw one sheet at the girl gently. Here, wear this for now. She nodded, catching the fabric and wrapping it around her as fast as she could. Without another word between the two, Issei turned and ran back to his room to save the nurse he left. The girl behind him followed closely. The hallway had started catching fire once more, but it wasn't bad enough to hinder their rush back to his room. Once they arrived at his door and rushed inside, he noticed immediately the smoke had cleared some, allowing the two nurses to breathe easier. The nurse that sat on the ground grew a huge blush and looked away, trying to hide her unprofessional embarrassment of his nudity situation. She stared at the nurse behind him, and recognition seemed to befall onto both of them, replacing the embarrassment she had painted on her face. Kuriko, the nurse he saved, said to the girl who he left behind. He had to admit, Kuriko looked a lot better when she was able to breathe and without the smoke obscuring his view of her. He listened to the two form a conversation while he went to cut the clean bed sheets into long strips, tying them together at each end to mimic how long he thought he was from the ground. Partner, you are running out of time. While they aren't looking, use magic to braid the straps together. They will be enough to support their body weight, but not yours. Just picture the rope weaving into braids, and magic will do the rest. He did as he was told, imagining the strips of sheet tangling into thick braids, and there was a red mist that surrounded the sheet, and he watched as it folded itself, and at a very fast pace. Hey Kiri? Kuriko said, trying to fix her long blue hair from the mess it had become. What happened to you? Are you hurt? I'm fine. I came back to get you, but the fire there was an explosion, and I was set on fire, but Issei he saved me. Kiri sounded more tearful at the end, her delicate voice cracking. Issei finished tying the ropes and gave each knot a good tug for safety. From outside the doorway, the fire picked up, another tank of oxygen exploded. Their attention shifted to it as Issei finished his magic tying. Come on, it's time to get you two out of here. he said, interrupting the two and grabbing the makeshift rope they didn't seem him use magic to make, but his thankfulness ran out as they were more perceptive than he thought they would be in times of their crisis. How did you make that so fast? Kiriko questioned. Issei sighed, but he couldn't hate how smart she was. He actually kind of liked it. Well, how about I tell you all later and save you now? He said, walking over to her and tying the rope around the sheet he tied around her before he left. She nodded along with Kiri, but her questions weren't done as she stood with the makeshift rope attached to the sheet he tied around her to hold her. The three walked towards the door. Issei threw his arms out, sending a pulse of wine through the door and blowing out the fires that stood in his way. The girls' eyes both widened in complete shock and amazement at the display he showed. They didn't question him as they were guided out the door and to the left towards the broken window. He tied the rope to the frame of the window and turned to Kiriko. I'll hoist you down, then I'll hoist Kiri down with you. Do you trust me? They nodded, not having any reason to not trust him, giving them. How will you get down, Issei? It was a good question, but he lied about it. I'll climb down behind you all, but I need the rest of you to go first. He sounded sincere, and he did his best to make it seem like he was being honest. Fortunately for him, they believed him. Kiriko moved to the window, stepping her feet out, and Issei grabbed the sheets. Slowly he let her down, skylights landed on them from the ground below, and one followed Kiriko from the air above. The fabric was stretching, and he noticed it more than he would like to admit. He hurried his pace, thanking his luck that she wasn't very heavy, and after several seconds that felt like eternity, she was finally close enough to the ground to jump down without damage, and he let what was left of the rope go, and she landed semi-gently on the ground. She untied herself, and he quickly pulled the sheets up to send Kiri down. When he pulled the sheets all the way up, she tied it around her waist, using it like a seat. Promise me you'll be safe. We both want you to make it with us more than you know. We owe you our lives. Issei nodded once again, lying with a smile. He was completely calm, and he knew he wouldn't be getting out the same as them, but it was alright, it was all to protect them. He picked her up bridal style and sat her on the window to prevent her from showing him her private parts, which was strange for him, but felt like the right thing to do in the scenario. He let her down, faster than how he let Kiriko down, the flames behind him sneaking up on his back being the reason behind that, and the sheets began to catch fire in his hands. He knew his mistake then, he shouldn't have piled them up beside him on the floor. She landed on the ground just as the sheet snapped from the frame. The sheet fell from the window sill and landed beside her. He could have caught it, and the two girls below him knew it, but they couldn't process what had happened or why he didn't seem to care. They looked up together, fear in their eyes as they stared at him, tears stinging the side of their eyes. He leaned over and looked into each of their eyes, then turned his eyes to the crowd and looked around. One caught his eyes as the wind blew her hood down to reveal her golden eyes and hair. He smiled before backing away into the flames, the screams of the girls saying his name through tears filled his ears. He wondered why they were feeling those emotions. The skylight pulled away, assuming he was already dead. He felt calm in the fires though, and he couldn't help but wondered why. Adrenaline is different from dragons and humans. You are calm because your adrenaline clouds those other emotions. Women can cause that effect as well as anger. Otherwise, you would still be in a lot of pain from your body's transformation into a dragon. The hairs on the back of his neck began to stick straight up. Visions of that night filled his head. His parents strung up by wires, mangled, and cut to pieces. The rage came to him, and his vision began to go green at the edges. This feeling was too familiar to him. He walked and opened the door he would have never dared open with the girls in his party. He touched the handle, and there was a horrible sizzle, but the door swung open still. He looked in after some of the smoke cleared. The scene would have given him nightmares if he hadn't seen worse already. There was a family, burned black and lifeless. He couldn't possibly imagine who it was, the life they lived, the fun and joy they had that was stripped from them far before their time should have been up. He wasn't sure why he was having such thoughts, they were things he wouldn't have ever cared about before, but now there was an understanding and longing that he would have never felt before. He sympathized. Partner, he's in this building with you. And then it hit him. His eyes widened. He fell to his knees. Everyone died because of him. The rage had fully taken over, the rationality had left Issei. He yelled in anger, and fire exploded around him. She wasn't in time. She stood in the crowd of people outside the hospital as it burned. She knew Issei was inside, she could tell. He was on the 5th floor, much to her dismay. He was alive though, and he was moving. She could only wait, she couldn't reveal herself to the public, and she only needed to breathe to know there were other supernatural beings watching, but suffering the same fate as she was. Issei was to be hers, and she had made it very evident to lay claim to him to all factions who kept a close eye on him. She had made that call when she felt the disturbance in the air the night of his parents' murder. She knew from the moment she felt it whose power it was and made her way over as fast as she could. She used all of her skills and diplomacy to claim her territory from the devils, and it was made easier since they failed to know he was alive until it was announced. She used that against them. She knew though that she could never take the place of his mother, but she could bring him a new happiness. She would give him a good life, like so many red dragon emperors before him failed to have. Her eyes went wide under her hooded kimono as she saw him at the window. His eyes would have gone unnoticed to normal people, but there was an anger behind them that she couldn't ever comprehend, and pain that she only hoped she could replace with something more. The blue-haired girl stepped out the window, and he hoisted her down after a few short exchanges of words. She smiled at his willingness to help others, but it didn't sate her worry for him. After the girl landed, he pulled the makeshift rope back up. He brought another girl to the window, this one he sat down in the window. He pulled the rope around her and sent her down faster than the first one. He looked down at the two as the rope fell and then gazed out into the crowd, and his eyes locked with hers for only a brief second before he recoiled into the flames with a smile she knew was fake. Her blonde hair fell behind her hood and caressed the side of her face as her heart was hit with the realization of every emotion the yell contained. Rage, despair, sadness, and loneliness. The hospital exploded, one entire floor like a bomb erupting. She knew why it had happened and she knew he was okay, but it still made her heart clench to know what he was going through and not being able to do anything. She could rush in, but she wasn't immune to flames like he was, and she wouldn't because she had a daughter to return home to. The ground below her shook and the flames began to change colors. It was only a slight shift, but it was noticeable to the trained eye. She found herself backing away from the crowd, being pushed further away from the hospital by police and firemen. The top floor collapsed and sent with it the floor that Issei was on. Then the fear came as she felt the magic. She watched as the people around her disappeared along with the fires of the hospital, and across from her, there were devils and fallen angels alike, their wings fully exposed by force, and her golden 9 tails flowed freely behind her back. This was a reality marble, and it belonged to Issei entirely. The sky was filled with stars, and the black was a hazy purple. The devils made their way to her, and the fallen angels prepared themselves together. Isaka. It was a greeting from the crimson-haired princess known as Ria's Gremory. Hello. I would proceed with caution from this point forward. I have no idea what he is capable of, and so far, it is far more than what I have imagined from a newly awakened dragon. She informed, offering the princess a friendly word of advice that she was sure wasn't needed, but perhaps the rest of her peerage didn't know what power was coming from that hospital. Since the fires are out. She wasn't listening past that phrase, but she knew immediately what she needed to do. It was because of him that he was like this. It was because of him that he lost everything he had ever come to love. It was him that he would seek his vengeance on. He moved through the halls, fire roaring around him. Partner, calm down. If you let your anger take over now, you'll lose even more. You're wrong. I have nothing more to lose. Maybe not now, but you will. The wave set in motion will bring you so much more. Do you really want to throw it away? Issei clenched his teeth together until they hurt. He gave no response to Drake. His anger couldn't subside. His power exploded around him, immediately extinguishing the flames, and his vision of the world around him turned gray. There was a dark shifting veil of red that surrounded him, his eyes turned green and were slit like an animal. Scales began to form on his body in a mist of red. He ran, the anger rushing through his hot-blooded veins. He burst through the door at the end of the hallway and rushed down the stairs, following after the power he wanted to destroy. Once he was on the main floor, he rushed after the power, jumping over debris, not questioning where the people he expected to see went. He ran through a door, busting glass as the scales finished covering his body and ended up outside. He stared out at a group, bat-winged and black-feathered. The one that stood out was Golden Tails. Confusion began to replace his anger as he noticed them all looking at him. The attention shifted behind him, and the group with bat wings and the lone girl with tails looked angry. There came a laugh behind him, and it was like clarity that washed over him. Wow, kid. You've gotten good at running since I last saw you. Too bad you weren't that good when you came home. The rage he felt toward the voice he recognized as his target was unimaginable. He turned, power rushing to his hands, the ground shook violently, and he swiped his hand up, turning as he did so, all rationality leaving his head of who he might hurt behind the more than powerful attack. Behind his attack came a streak of red energy. The energy shot a beam of power forward that reached high into the sky and destroyed everything in front of it with a powerful sweep. Claw marks were left on the ground below him, and the energy that shot out began to grow jagged edges like mountaintops. The streaks of energy subsided, and the amount of carnage they left behind was flabbergasting for the lookers behind him. Buildings were ripped in half, the ground was destroyed as deep fissures were formed that took the shape of his clawed gauntlet. Wow. That was an impressive kid. You are really something. The killer never finished as the ground began to shake from the aftershock of Issei's attack. Buildings that stood strong fell at the violent rumbling of the earth. The killer fell, and he looked up for only a moment. His eyes widened, and he smiled terrifyingly. Issei looked down at him, his red scales covering his arms and legs, his neck, and all the vitals of his torso. Power formed behind Issei in a terrible orb of red that pulled more and more energy from the world around him into a red center he couldn't possibly understand. The power gave everyone a dark chill, and the energy only increased exponentially with each passing second. Issei's hands moved, and the orb followed. The killer disappeared, flashing behind Issei in only a second of time. The orb smashed the ground, and briefly, the sound of everything became a ringing silence that was shattered by a loud and low rumbling wail that made everyone take several steps away from Issei. There was a flash of red that lit the sky, and once the light settled, eyes went wide. Beyond where Issei had thrown the orb was nothing. Buildings and nature were wiped away without a trace, and Issei was facing the killer, his left hand drawn back. Green energy burned from Issei's eyes and flowed above him to his side. Wings exploded behind him, crimson scales with green gems decorating each joint. He drilled his fist forward, connecting with the killer's stomach. Wind exploded around them, and blood shot from the man's mouth onto Issei's chest. The attack was enough to send the killer spiraling backwards as blood gushed from his mouth and nose. She looked with wide eyes as his attack sent the killer flying back in a mess of his own blood. Her tails fluttered behind her in worry, not for the killer, but for Issei. He was emitting a feeling that could only come from someone driven by revenge. His blood boiled with the power of Drake, so thick with destructive force she felt it in her bones. Her eyes followed the killer, who landed on his feet and showed he wasn't going to lose very easily. She prayed that he would say nothing, but from what she had already seen from him, his goal was to see how much Issei could take. He wanted to toy with the boy and break him mentally now. Ahaha. You hit like your mother did. If I look at it from the right angle, it will be like killing her twice. Her eyes widened, along with the group beside her. She looked at Issei, and he was dead still, his face was cast down and silhouetted. The power from him shifted, and she had an idea of what it was that was about to be unleashed. The green orbs floating around Issei were enough to steer her in the right direction. All of you, if you wish to not die, I would leave this area immediately. The voice came from Drake as she remembered, and she knew immediately her guess was wrong, and then the fear began to seep into her core. She turned to the others, the fallen angels already evacuating. We need to leave now, she yelled, the panic in her voice showing more than she cared to admit. The group fled, and she followed, watching Issei from a further distance as he started to glow. Power exploded around Issei, sending shockwaves of red energy into the atmosphere, slicing the wind with a force so profound it sliced buildings clean through, and the ground around him cracked under extreme pressure. She felt everything he felt, the hatred, anger, sadness, and fear. I, who shall awaken? The time has finally come. She was wrong, she was so wrong. I am the heavenly dragon who stole the principles of domination from God. It has always been this way, always, and forever. She watched as his body shifted, growing larger with more scales. Wings exploded from his back in what she could only assume was extremely painful, and she swore she saw his bones break and shift back together in new patterns. I laugh at the infinite and grieve at the dream. What the world desires and what the world forgets. She had to wait it out. She knew she had to wait until she could save him. She was the only one that could, but she would have to wait for him to exhaust his power a little. I shall become the red dragon of domination. And once this world remembers, this world shall cease to be. It was always for power the path to ruin. She stopped her thoughts. The echoed voices said something she wouldn't have expected even in her wildest of imaginations. She knew then she would have to do something she hasn't in such a long time. Use her own true form. I shall drown you in the depths of crimson purgatory. The ground shook and shadows shifted and the power grew to almost unbearable levels, almost like an attack was being prepared. When the dust and debris cleared fully, she was able to see Issei, magic flowing with a mind of its own and covered in crimson scales and green jewels. He looked more like a dragon than a human, but it was a pitiful transformation. One capable of destroying the host, but it was reversible. There was a low growl as Issei stared at the man who killed his parents, his body a broken and unmoving mess. His left arm moved above his head and swiped down, hitting the ground with a destructive force that would put even her best attacks on a knife's edge. There was a bright flash of light, followed by an explosion that blew dirt and debris straight up, while sending a gust of wind strong enough to uproot trees. She didn't need to look to know there was nothing left. The man got what he deserved, but she was more interested in Issei. She started to run towards him, her cloak falling off as golden flames burned on her tails that swung freely behind her. Her eyes lit as she ran, she transformed, letting her human body burn away as she grew to a height far larger than Issei. She was running out of time. She wasn't in Kyoto. Her magic wasn't limitless here, which meant she had to be very careful about her next few moves. If she died trying to save the boy she wanted in her future with Kunu, she would have failed her promise to give him a good life while dooming her people. It was a risk, and a big one at that, not even to mention she would have failed as a parent. She wouldn't make a mistake. It had to be impossible. She leapt to her side, landing in front of Issei, making sure no one was behind her. She summoned her foxfire, and that was enough to catch the attention, but her attack didn't come first, but she thanked her lucky stars for finally aligning. Longinus Smasher. The giant beam of red energy shot past her, missing by only an inch. Everything around her became silent, and a second later, there was a screech that made her head pound. She looked slowly to her right, and she was thankful it was a miss. Everything behind her was gone, like it had never existed to begin with, and it stretched as far as she could see. Just how big was this world he created? How strong would he get? She snapped herself out of her daze. Now was her chance. She lunged at him, tackling him to the ground. To a complete transformation, this would have been a stupid move for her, but she hoped her guess was correct, and he was exhausted of his power. Her fire covered the boy, and herself as well. There was a scream of pain, and it hurt something in her heart, but she knew she had to do it to save him. Their flames were able to burn through almost anything, nothing could be spared from their wrath, but it was the other properties of those flames that were going to be her saving grace. They were eating through the boy's magic, consuming it down to nothing, and returning it to her in full. He shrunk down in size, growing weaker as the blue flames ate away more and more. She shrunk down with him, his bones crunched loud enough for her to hear, and it was enough to make her stomach churn in disgust. She rushed to him as he turned back to human. She looked at the boy, and she was shocked at his appearance. Red swirls and markings in a language she had never seen before adorned his body, but they looked aggressive in nature, and the power that seeped through them was anything but good-intentioned. She grew disgusted at herself as she looked closer at his death-like still body. She had burnt the right side of his body. She didn't know if he would ever heal from that, but she hoped he would. She couldn't bear looking at him knowing that was done from her own hand. She shook her head and looked at the issue at hand. She threw her black and gold kimono on him to cover him up. The markings were not normal for any host, in fact it was more unnatural. There was nothing like this ever written down, so to say it piqued her interest was the understatement of the year. She was running out of energy, and it was because the boy was now absorbing it, and the thought alone was scary. The power of a half-dragon was already enough to scare her. She didn't want to imagine the future. What exactly had she done? This might have been a bigger problem than she could have handled. No, she joked to herself. She summoned a circle below the power and watched him disappear in flakes of gold energy. He was safe at her shrine now, and she watched as the destruction he had caused inside his reality pieced itself back together slowly, reversing itself before her very eyes in one of the most amazing displays of pure power she had ever been in. She turned to the devils, and she knew she would need their help to fix everything. To make everything correct in the human world. She needed to make up a story for the killer, the hospital, and Issei. She sighed. She needed a drink. He floated in dark waters, his body was light, and he felt calm as he stared at the titan before him. Hello again, little one. Before him, green eyes peered through him, powerful, and filled with more than he could comprehend. He wanted to run, he felt the fear bellow in him, but he refused. He smiled at the dragon he saw, trapped inside a colossal orb that radiated terrible powers and energies of destruction around it. Slinging the power like water, the energy flowed through him like he wasn't actually present. The orb was strange for him to look at, as it slung power from it in blades. It also seemed to suck in magic at the same time. His eyes struggled to keep up. You have come far, the great dragon hissed at him, like speaking in his own foreign language. Despite the hissing sound that was evidently a form of speech, the words came to his ears as something more ancient than the voice in his head. I hope you have enjoyed your journey to power thus far. I have enjoyed my journey, and I will continue to enjoy it much more. He answered, in a voice he hoped sounded braver than he felt. The red-scaled dragon gave a low laugh, his appearance and laugh reflecting his unfathomable power and destructive beauty. I like you, little one. The dragon inched closer, the orb dispelling and filling Issei with a new feeling. His fear was burning away and being replaced with something far different. He smiled at the dragon widely, knowing now he was safe as the puzzle pieces connected faster than he could blink. Clarity bursted through him with the force of a nuke as he looked at the dragon with eyes on stalk, reflecting the same power and destruction. The dragon stopped only an inch away from Issei, lowering his head to eye level so Issei could get lost in the terror hidden behind his eyes, but instead, the dragon earned a smile. The boy was unlike anything he had ever seen or dealt with before. Most who bore witness to his tremendous structure and power writhed in fear and grew mad with the thought of power. You stand before me, borrowing my power, and smile as if it's your own. It has been a long time since anyone has dared approach me in their slumber, but when they do they never keep their mentality after. I drive my hosts mad with power, that's what I'm capable of without even scratching the surface of my abilities. Do you fear me, little one? Issei stared directly into the dragon's eyes, a fire burning inside of him that belonged to him alone. Everything around him melted away like mist as the darkness shifted and began to be replaced by tunneled visions of green. The dragon seemed to freeze as well, still and silent as they peered deep into the psyche of the other. Issei saw everything the dragon did desperately to hide, he could see the dragon's lust for carnage and destruction. All he wanted was to cause pain and escape his confinement to unleash destruction onto those who trapped him and destroy all who oppose him. There were no happy thoughts in the dragon's mind. Issei did see, however, there was a terrible longing to be free, to be happy again. Looking deeper, Issei found something he would have never expected. Fear was at the center of the dragon's heart and mind, fear of Issei and what he was capable of while trapped inside him. Fear of Issei dying and fear of killing Issei with his magic. Greg saw other things. He saw the boy's rage, vile, and vanity all bottled up and festering into something so dark and sinister that he couldn't fully visualize what would happen if it were to get released, and he threw his power on top of it, making it worse and leading to something far more explosive. Standing in front of him was a ticking time bomb of his own magic power that he could no longer restrict. Slowly, he felt the fear began to build and fill his heart for many reasons he wouldn't admit to. The fear inside the boy's heart began to burn away, being replaced by a calmness that Drake knew all too well to be the dragon instinct taking over. His answer from the boy was made clear at that moment. His smile grew wider. He had created a physical manifestation of himself inside the boy. He had finally found a vessel worthy to hold him. He was stronger than the boy now, but soon, they would become one and be unstoppable. He would practically be free once more. He looked deeper into the boy, and there was a want for power, a lust for it, and even further, he saw the lust the boy had for the opposite gender, that would surely only be amplified now by the dragon instinct searing through the body of the boy. He coiled back, not letting his eyes leave the smiling boy, and smiled bigger than before. His question about the boy fearing him was answered in full, and he enjoyed the answer that was never verbally said. He gave a laugh as he disappeared into the darkness, leaving the boy alone. Around Issei, the darkness shifted once more, forming into a narrow corridor, dimly lit by torches, stuck almost in a permanent state of being extinguished, but being deprived of having that luxury. Each wall had a slight flow behind it, like he was inside some breathing creature that was disturbed by his presence alone. The torches flickered with his first step, and he wondered where he would end up going. Chapter 3. The Corridors. She looked at the boy on the bed before her, still absorbing more power than she could imagine. If she wanted to consider him as something less than what he was, which she would never do, she would say she landed herself the best bargaining chip that had ever existed. She knew of the White One's power, and it didn't hold much of any candle to the power the boy resting on her bed had displayed in such a short time after awakening. All the stars in the night sky had aligned and created what she imagined was already the most powerful red dragon emperor that would ever walk the earth or underworld. She had been sitting and watching him now for about 3 days, having no idea when he would wake up from the magical exhaustion he had suffered from by himself and her own hands. She flinched at the thought of her harming him, but was thankful that by the 3rd day the fire burn she had laid upon him healed completely with no scars or permanent damage. She looked out of the window in her room as rain poured from the night sky above. Since when has it started raining? How long has it been since it started raining? She honestly wasn't paying much attention. Her focus was drawn inside her head and to the future scenarios that kept playing on repeat. Her eyes became heavy as she listened to the puttering of the rain and fought to stay awake. Her head was becoming too heavy to hold up, and she laid over on the bed with Issei without much of a second thought. How long had she been awake? She couldn't remember, and she found that to be strange. She had always been the person to pay attention to the little details, as the small details could change the course of battle and send the largest of ripples. She reached for his hand and held it in hers, and she immediately felt comfort burst through her. Something about the boy made her this way, and she was not quite sure why, but it was a feeling she discovered when she first touched him to stop him from killing himself in Juggernaut Drive. He lit a fire inside her that ate all the discomfort and worries away and turned them into a warm feeling of acceptance and comfort. She couldn't help but fall under her own influence when she was like this. The future was something that could be imagined easily, and with the fire burning inside her, she wanted the future to hold him with her and her daughter. Perhaps that was bad and wrong of her. She couldn't help it. She moved closer to him and snuggled into his side as her head rested on his chest. She shifted her left hand that held Issei's right down between her breasts and almost between her legs and wrapped her right arm around his stomach to hold him in a tender and loving embrace. As she did this, she felt power leave her and be replaced by his. She felt stronger than she had ever felt before, and the calmness grew inside her as she fell asleep on him in only a matter of seconds. Almost immediately after falling asleep on Issei, she found herself walking along a long, narrow, dark corridor. Shadows danced in the flickering light of the few torches that hung on the walls from metal perches, giving the corridor an eerie illusion of movement in the absence of any life aside from her. For a moment, as she looked at the walls, she felt like she was inside some living thing. The walls around moved slightly like some giant creature breathing. Her eyes struggled more and more to focus on the walls the longer she looked, and the only place she could stare at for long periods of time was the pitch-black darkness at the end of the corridor. Her vision was tunneled and outlined while staring at the walls, but despite the impossible movement she swore she saw, everything was entirely silent, and that bothered her greatly. She turned around behind her and saw a darkness that was far closer to her than she cared for, and the fact she could see nothing behind it made a small amount of fear stir in her. She felt dizzy the more she stared into the darkness, so she turned and faced the darkness in the corridor once more as her dizziness slowly faded away in a strange feeling that left her feeling dazed, which was a feeling she was unfamiliar with. She began to move, having nowhere else to go, and she felt that if she stayed still, something else would happen, and in the back of her mind, she knew it wasn't going to be good for her. She walked for what felt like hours, passing by endless amounts of torches, and with each step she took, the silence grew closer, making it harder for her to breathe with each passing second. Her eyes grew heavy, and she blinked long and hard. When her vision returned, the torches that adorned the walls all shifted to one side and lined up endlessly, leaving the wall to her right completely dark, absorbing all the light that touched it. She was afraid of getting closer to the wall in fear of what might happen if she fell into it. She turned around rapidly and was immediately discombobulated as the torches shifted to the alternate wall, and the wall she was close to became shadowed and reached out to her. She fell backwards and landed against the wall with the torches. Her head started pounding as her heart raced. She turned back the other way, the torches shifted again, but the wall didn't shift with them. Now the torches floated in the air, as if held by figments of her imagination. She stood and began to run in the direction she thought she was the way she went before. She ran faster, her breath being harder and harder to catch as the air began to feel like syrup moving through her nose. She emerged through the corridor and fell into a chamber. The only furniture that filled the room was a giant mirror-like structure that had a flowing behind them like waves and secreted red energy that she immediately recognized as drag. The only form of lights in the room were torches that burned a crimson red instead of a normal orange, which produced far less light than she thought was possible. Reluctantly, she moved towards the mirror and grew afraid of what it would show her, but knew deep down she would look anyway. A reflection appeared slowly, as if it was also afraid to look out at her. It wasn't one reflection that stared out at her though, it was two. A mirror directly across from her revealed herself and Issei. She stood silently, but Issei moved around, motioning her to follow as he disappeared into the darkness the mirror had growing deep within. Her breath caught in her throat, and it took all her strength to force herself to breathe. Her image moved next, shifting into the darkness of the mirrors fading away as Issei's did as well. She moved closer to the mirrors, trying to see where the images had gone, but the surface was blank. She lifted her hand, and as she touched the mirror directly across from her, the glass rippled like water under her fingers. Without thinking, she pushed herself through the liquid of the mirror and fell through it. As she went through it, she discovered the mirror was still in front of her, but now she was surrounded by mirrors. Anna clawed at the back of her mind, but she couldn't run, she could only turn and look into the mirrors that reflected a blank slate around her. Her body began to feel strange and foreign to her, as if it wasn't her own. She looked down at her flat chest and masculine hands, and terror clawed the walls that confined her brain. She looked to her left, and she saw Issei staring at her in his balance breaker armor, eyes glowing a fierce green. She looked to her right and saw Issei walking away, moving into the darkness. She turned to the reflection of him in his balance breaker and reached for the mirror, as it was the only one with a reflection left. As her hand passed through the watery surface of the mirror, all the other mirrors suddenly exploded and collapsed, the water that filled them dropping to the stone floor and vanishing into the cracks between the stones. Only a red mist remained from the water. She turned her head behind her as a screeching sound behind her like stone grinding against stone, and saw a large set of double doors emerge from the ground. On each side of the corridor, large doors formed, each one differed from the double door in design, size, and shape. She backed away, standing in the middle of the room with partly closed eyes from tiredness. She listened to the silence for any sound that would help her find a way out or help guide her to understanding what she was to do next. A cold breeze blew across her face. It came from the direction of the double doors, and she took it as a sign. She moved to the double doors, the breeze growing stronger with each step. She reached for the glimmering, gold doorknob, but stopped as she felt something horrible behind the door. Her hand began to shake, and she was sure of it now. Behind the door, she could feel evil and hate waiting and building up, but not just waiting for her. She froze, she was too afraid to know what waited behind the door she reached for. She let go and turned back behind her. The image of Issei in his armor shifted into a giant red dragon, smiling down at her, sending her spiraling in her own terror. Where was she? And why? She watched as the image of Drake slowly faded into the black waters behind the surface of the mirror. The mirror shifted again and reflected the door behind her perfectly, failing to cast her own reflection back towards her. She froze. Did she really want to know what was behind those doors? A sudden need filled her, like an urgency, and knowledge that time was limited here and she needed to hurry and decide if she wanted to continue or not. She raised her hand and grabbed the doorknob once more. She turned the knob and pushed the door open, using all her strength to open the weight of the door. Everything went dark as she moved through the doorway and her feet found only emptiness below her. She shifted and the point where she came in was gone. She tumbled into the darkness and the darkness began to shift and change until suddenly her vision came to her. She flung herself up and terror was what struck her heart as she stared at emerald eyes filled with the rage of an angered god. Lightning struck outside the window in her room, casting a ghostly white light into the room that shadowed the monster that stood before her as her fear began to grow with each passing second of realization. She crawled away, unsure of what to do. This was a position she didn't plan. She hadn't expected him to awake still in a partially enraged state. She couldn't attack him, in fear of hurting him and losing all chances of obtaining his trust, but she couldn't let him continue his rampage. She watched as his power began to spike larger with each second, almost endlessly. How was she supposed to stop this? Before, she waited till he was weak before using her foxfire to absorb what little magic power he had left, but now. Her fire would be so laughably outmatched to how fast he gained power back. She continued to back away, towards the door that she knew awaited behind her. Lightning exploded outside, shaking her already trembling body. The monster no. The boy that stood before her gave her fear that she hadn't felt in a long time. The force of the Red Dragon Emperor when enraged was something everyone feared, even the White One. Before her eyes, she watched as her room splintered past her, wood and drywall broke and exploded like a bomb. She shielded her eyes with her arms, and as the debris cleared, she gained the courage to stare at the boy before her. She looked closely to how he was standing, what power his body was giving off. Her eyes began to burn a gold color as she looked at him and saw more than she thought possible. His power was driven from anger and grew by it too, but she saw more too. She saw his grief, confusion, and fear. She could never understand the boy and what he went through. She had lived a very different life despite war. The glow in her eyes stopped. She knew how to handle this situation. Very poorly, yes, but it was possible. Or at least she hoped. She looked deep into the woods of the forest that surrounded her house and knew she had people lined up to attack and protect her. She took a deep breath and put one foot in front of her other. The boy looked lifeless as she approached him, his emerald eyes being the only thing that popped more than the rest. She was saddened at the sight of the boy. Juggernaut Drive had taken its toll on the boy, and she wondered if even now he was using more than he was able to, shortening his life further. "It's okay, I won't hurt you, I promise," she calmly said, slowly approaching him. It was worth a try. The angered growl she received was well and evident that it was a failed one, but she had to continue. It had to have been possible. She started approaching again, her arms held up to show she was unarmed. If she could touch him and keep holding him for only a few seconds, she could fix him and be started down a brighter path. The boy seemed to be halfway understanding as he let some of his guard down. She inched closer, but the boy backpedaled away and grabbed his head. She felt the power below her feet begin to shift direction. The boy gained a red aura of immense power, making it almost hard to breathe. Below her, she felt the magic shift flowing from her and into her as if she was disconnected from the world she was linked to. Such power. Such beauty. Never had she felt so weak before in her home. She looked at the guards that lined the treetops and she hoped they wouldn't attack. She hoped they felt it too. The divine aura and power exploded around Issei in a flurry of red and green energy. She stared at his noticeable aura and was afraid to use her senjutsu to look even further beyond the surface. But she wanted to know how much power flowed through him. Her eyes glowed a bright gold and the world shifted in colors all around her. She felt paralyzed as she felt something far greater than what most gods were even capable of. Before her, the boy she thought she could lead and give a good life was surrounded in his own personal hurricane of magic, all the colors she could imagine dripping into one another seamlessly. His green eyes pierced through the wall of twisting madness and anger and stared at her with the veracity of an angered god. Thanks for watching this video. Part 1 is over. If you really enjoy this video, like, subscribe, and comment down below and turn on that bell notification. And also check out the playlist that I have created and enjoy. Link is in the description. See you in the next video. Goodbye.